Hey, everyone. Welcome to Storytelling Time, the place where every story comes alive. If you love getting lost in thrilling tales, gripping mysteries, and epic adventures, you're in the right spot. I'm your storyteller, and here, we don't just tell stories, we bring them to life. Whether it's fantasy, mystery, horror, or even a bit of comedy, we're all about immersion. So grab a snack, get comfy, and prepare for a journey that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single chapter. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join the Storytelling Time family. Let's dive into the stories that await, starting now. Caleb had wandered a long time through the dim-lit streets before deciding he'd follow Jack inside. Jack had disappeared upstairs with the sickly little girl, the one with white ribbons in her hair and a cough that sounded like it was borrowed from the grave, but Caleb was here for someone else. He was here to see the blind woman. They said she'd done it on purpose, smeared donkey tail sap straight into her eyes till they boiled like milk in a pan. That kind of pain, it must have scorched more than just her sight, probably left tracks down her arms, down her face, maybe even into her soul if such a thing still existed. Around Santa Fe, folks had a taste for that kind of ecstasy. He'd seen women bite the heads off snakes, children walk barefoot over embers, men drink lye like it was holy water. But it wasn't superstition, no, superstition was harmless. Superstition was tying your right boot before the left, or not whistling after dark. Superstition was shooting your brother if he wore the wrong color. That had its own logic, warped but clean. But what they did out here, it wasn't just belief. It was need. And Caleb knew need. Even Jack didn't believe in superstition. He'd explained it to Caleb plain as a knife edge, back at Fort Smith, right after they strangled that poor bluecoat boy in the hayloft. All we done is kill, Jack had said, lighting a hand-rolled smoke, so don't start crying over another one now. Caleb had thought on that long and hard. It made a kind of cracked sense. And after that, he stopped thinking about the boy's face, or tried to. But this thing with the blind woman, this was no superstition. Even Jack would have to admit that. The brothel's laughter faded behind him as he followed the proprietor to the rear. The man wasn't Anastasio, not the one from the Mexican War, the one with gold teeth and a knife behind every word. No, this one was younger, smaller, with eyes black as tar pits. He looked like maybe Anastasio's bastard child, same quiet, burning stillness. They passed under a crooked lintel. Caleb had to stoop. "You speak English?" he asked the man. A vague shake of the head. Maybe a shrug. "I saw a Roman priest around here earlier. Your people think the love of God and the love of women are the same thing. Guess that's why y'all keep the whores and the prophets and the priests under one roof." Jack had laughed at that one. Caleb smiled weakly at his own joke. The man didn't. "Perdón, señor," he muttered, then gestured sharply to a chair Caleb couldn't see until his knees hit it. The room was near black, save two guttering candles set before a lurid painting of Christ crucified. Same damn painting from 16 years ago, wild white eyes, mouth agape like a man swallowing the end of the world. Caleb averted his gaze. He didn't like Jesus like that. If he had to picture him, he preferred Jesus with lambs, or little children, soft, clean versions. Ones that didn't remind him of himself. Caleb had wandered a long time through the dim-lit streets before deciding he'd follow Jack inside. Jack had disappeared upstairs with the sickly little girl, the one with white ribbons in her hair and a cough that sounded like it was borrowed from the grave, but Caleb was here for someone else. He was here to see the blind woman. They said she'd done it on purpose, smeared donkey tail sap straight into her eyes till they boiled like milk in a pan. That kind of pain, it must have scorched more than just her sight, probably left tracks down her arms, down her face, maybe even into her soul if such a thing still existed. Around Santa Fe, folks had a taste for that kind of ecstasy. He'd seen women bite the heads off snakes, children walk barefoot over embers, men drink lye like it was holy water. But it wasn't superstition, no, superstition was harmless. Superstition was tying your right boot before the left, or not whistling after dark. Superstition was shooting your brother if he wore the wrong color. That had its own logic, warped but clean. But what they did out here, it wasn't just belief. It was need. And Caleb knew need. Even Jack didn't believe in superstition. He'd explained it to Caleb plain as a knife edge, back at Fort Smith, right after they strangled that poor bluecoat boy in the hayloft. "All we done is kill," Jack had said, lighting a hand-rolled smoke, "so don't start cryin' over another one now." Caleb had thought on that long and hard. It made a kind of cracked sense. And after that, he stopped thinking about the boy's face, or tried to. But this thing with the blind woman, this was no superstition. Even Jack would have to admit that. The brothel's laughter faded behind him as he followed the proprietor to the rear. The man wasn't Anastasio, not the one from the Mexican War, the one with gold teeth and a knife behind every word. No, this one was younger, smaller, with eyes black as tar pits. He looked like maybe Anastasio's bastard child, same quiet, burning stillness. They passed under a crooked lintel. Caleb had to stoop. "You speak English?" he asked the man. A vague shake of the head. Maybe a shrug. "I saw a Roman priest around here earlier. Your people think the love of God and the love of women are the same thing. Guess that's why y'all keep the whores and the prophets and the priests under one roof." Jack had laughed at that one. Caleb smiled weakly at his own joke. The man didn't. "Perdón, señor," he muttered, then gestured sharply to a chair Caleb couldn't see until his knees hit it. The room was near black, save two guttering candles set before a lurid painting of Christ crucified. Same damn painting from 16 years ago, wild white eyes, mouth agape like a man swallowing the end of the world. Caleb averted his gaze. He didn't like Jesus like that. If he had to picture him, he preferred Jesus with lambs, or little children, soft, clean versions. Ones that didn't remind him of himself. And then, in the dark, he realized, she was already sitting across from him. Rosa. She was smaller than he remembered, older than he imagined. The fire-red hair still there, untouched by the years, but the rest of her hadn't been so lucky. Her face had collapsed in on itself like an old fruit, pockmarked, lined, bagged at the cheeks and under the chin. Still, it was the eyes that ruined her. Not gone, worse. Part open, always, showing a flicker of milky white that pulsed and twitched with a life of its own. Made him think of the boy again, the one at Fort Smith, the way his eyes had looked, half open and glazed. Back then, Anastasio had told Caleb she was one of the desadiciles, the ungentled. Holy sick, unfit for ordinary work. That was the term. Rosa had been too much for the house, even for Santa Fe. Her breath came in slow, drawn-out pulls. Caleb's own chest synced up without him realizing it. Her hand, thin as spider silk, crept across the table and found his. "Te recuerdo," she whispered. He flinched. "You are changed," she said next, not a compliment, not a curse. Just a fact. Caleb swallowed. "You too, Rosa." He rubbed the scar across his cheek. The one Pericles gave him, the horse, back when they marched through Little Rock. Cold winters made the wound throb like a storm was coming. "There's another war," he said, voice stiff. "Not with the Mexicans this time. It's with ourselves." She said nothing. Her pulse didn't even skip. "You're a murderer and a thief," Rosa said, plain as a prayer. "You're a whore and a liar." His hand tightened around her wrist, not enough to bruise, but enough to feel her blood push back. "I ain't no more a killer than I was born to be. You ever sleep on rock with fire in your gut and frost on your skin? You ever scream for death and don't even get that? The 8th Missouri Cavalry tried to kill me, Rosa. I took what I was owed." He paused. He thought of the boy again, his face turning blue as the sky above. "That guard was just another grayback. I shot dozens. He don't count." His voice was shaking. She asked, "Are you making a confession?" He pulled back like she'd struck him. "No. I want prophecy, not forgiveness. Don't need that. You were wrong last time, you know. About Jack. He never hurt me. He's all I got." Her face didn't change. Her eyes, that pale, rotted edge of them, flickered in candlelight. "What is it you want?" she asked. "Prophecy, goddammit." He slammed the table. "You cost more than all the others. You better say something worth the silver." But he didn't say the rest. Didn't say how he dreamed of her, night after night, in those sad hours before sleep, dreamed she'd remember him, dreamed she'd love him now, finally. Dreamed maybe he'd save her this time. And when she said "Te recuerdo," "I remember you," maybe she did. Maybe she didn't. He wasn't sure what he hoped for anymore. Jack lay on his back, shirt open, boots still on. The girl was curled beside him, her breath rattling like a jar full of bones. She was 16, maybe. Or maybe 14 and worn thin. Pale as moon milk, ribs like prayer hands, fingers cold even against the chill. He hadn't touched her. Not like that. Wouldn't. He wasn't a monster. But she had asked to lie beside him. Whispered it in a voice like dry grass catching wind. And there was something about her, not the sickness, not the youth, something else, something off. Like she'd stepped through the world wrong and come out skewed. Her name was Esme. Or she said it was. Could have been lying. Jack didn't care. He stared at the ceiling, counting cracks. Somewhere downstairs, Caleb was talking to the blind woman. He could feel it in his ribs, that tightness Caleb always carried into a room like smoke before a fire. Esme reached up and touched the scar on his jaw. "You look like a wolf," she said. "One that got caught in a trap." Jack smiled faintly. "Maybe I did. You smell like salt and rust. That's just war." "War," she repeated, as if trying it on like a dress that didn't fit. "You two been running from it or chasing it?" Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. "Your friend," she said after a minute, "the quiet one. He thinks you're his twin." Jack's body stilled. "We're not." "No. He's tethered to you. Like a balloon to a wrist. But you're not holding on, are you?" Jack turned to look at her. Her eyes were gray and glassy. Not fevered, not weeping. Just still. "You some kind of priestess?" "No," she said. "Just dying." Her hand found his again. She coughed once, long and low. Blood speckled the corner of her mouth, but she wiped it away like it was nothing. "I had a brother," she said. "Before the cough. Before the soldiers came. He looked at me like that, too, like I was something he could keep. Jack exhaled. Did he? No, she said. He burned. Then I burned. But I didn't die. That was the wrong part. He stared at her a while. The room smelled of mildew and crushed sage. The candle on the dresser guttered low. Shadows leaned long. You should sleep, he said gently. I can't, she murmured. There's a man in the house with a hollow face. No eyes. Just hollows. He walks the halls before death shows up. Jack stiffened. You see him now? Not yet. She curled closer. But you should go soon. You don't have much time left. Jack's throat tightened. Is that your prophecy? He asked. She smiled. Her teeth were small and crooked. No. That's just something I heard. He stayed with her a few minutes more. Listening. Watching the candle die. Then, with a kiss to her forehead, careful, brief, he stood and left. The hallway outside was darker than it should have been. The world had changed. Not all at once, not like it had inside the room, not like the tidal flood of time and fire and creation that had crushed him to dust and rebuilt him in its eye. No, this change was slower. Crueler. The kind you only noticed once it already had you by the throat. Caleb leaned against the broken hitching post outside the brothel, one hand pressed to his side where Bill had kicked him. Blood crusted his nose and lip. His head throbbed like a war drum, but worse was the heat under his skin, not fever, not pain. Something else. Something holy and wrong. He could still hear her voice, Esperanza, raspy, fractured, sharp as obsidian. Find and follow the narrow path of the real, the self not itself emptied of itself. He didn't know what it meant. Not fully. But it wouldn't let him go. Santa Fe spun slow around him in that way towns sometimes do just before dawn, when the world forgets itself. The frost was lifting off the roofs. The sky had gone from violet to bruised gold. A dog barked once, far off, and then was quiet. He walked. Not toward the boarding house. Not toward Jack. He didn't know where Jack was and didn't want to look. Not yet. His boots carried him south, past adobe walls and shuttered stalls, toward the little Catholic mission where he and Bill had once hunkered during the rains, 16 years ago. He remembered the thunder beating over the Sangre de Cristos, remembered trying to light a smoke with shaking hands, remembered the priest who wouldn't stop praying, even as the roof leaked like a sinner's soul. The mission was empty now, abandoned. Cross half-rotted. Doors hanging loose. The sanctuary smelled of old wax and rot. Caleb sat in the back pew, elbows on knees, hands dangling limp. He tried to pray. Couldn't. He didn't believe. Hadn't since before the war. God was for other men. Men who hadn't watched children burn in cornfields, hadn't buried their own under strange stars. But whatever he'd seen last night, that wasn't nothing. He remembered the earth peeling itself backward. The white void. The pinprick of beginning. And something inside him now whispered that the world had ended last night. And everything since was only echo. His fingers twitched. He thought of Esperanza's hand in his, skin like paper, voice like wind over grave dirt. He thought of Bill's foot slamming into his face. He thought of Jack. That strange, wild boy who'd grown into a quiet, half-dangerous man. That long winter in Missouri, the two of them eating boot leather and dry oats. That night in the Ozarks when Jack had woken screaming and Caleb had taken his hand and whispered nonsense until sleep returned. Caleb stood. He looked up at the broken cross. "I'm not asking forgiveness," he said aloud. "Just direction." No answer. He laughed bitterly. Didn't think so. And yet, he felt it. The pull. A direction, vague but undeniable. Not west. Not California. Not escape. Jack woke to silence. Not the silence of peace, the silence that follows shouting, or breaking glass. A silence that pressed on the chest like wet wool. He sat up slowly in the narrow cot, hand going instinctively to the revolver under his pillow. Gone. No, not stolen. Just, taken. He'd left it on the desk, still in its holster. His fingers closed around it now, cold from the night air. He listened. No footfalls. No voices. No Caleb. Jack rubbed a hand over his jaw. His stubble rasped under his palm like dry grass. He dressed fast and slipped out the boarding room door, descending the creaking staircase 2 steps at a time. The landlady was in her rocker, smoking a pipe, eyes dull from too many years of disappointment. "Your friend gone," she said without looking up. Jack paused. "Gone where?" She shrugged. "Didn't say." "Did he take his pack?" She nodded. "His horse?" "Still out back." "Mean little thing. Near bit me." Jack stepped outside. The air was thin and sharp, but the day was already warming. He squinted into the sun. Santa Fe still slept, but uneasily. There was a pressure in the streets, a weight on the buildings. Something bent, like a nail just before it breaks. He found Caleb's horse tied loosely behind the stables, twitchy and stamping, as if it too knew something had gone sideways. Jack didn't call for Caleb. That would have been too easy. Instead, he walked. Followed instinct, the same instinct that had kept him alive through Tennessee, through Vicksburg, through the long retreat from Atlanta with Caleb half limping beside him, blood soaking both their sleeves. He checked the whorehouse first. The red curtains were drawn. The man at the door was new, young, trying too hard to look dangerous. Jack gave him a glance that said move. The man moved. Inside, it smelled of opium and old perfume. He asked for Esperanza. The madam gave him a long look. "She doesn't take men like you anymore." Jack leaned forward, real quiet. "I think she just took a man like me last night." The madam's face shifted, not with surprise, but a kind of grim recognition. She didn't argue. "She won't see anyone else today," she said. "Maybe not ever." Jack didn't push. He already knew she was telling the truth. He stepped back out into the street and just stood there, breathing. Something had happened. Something real. Not just one of Caleb's fits, though he'd had those too. Nightmares that left him thrashing. Guilt over the boy at Fort Smith, over the farmer with the missing thumb, over the girl in Vicksburg whose name they never learned. All of it swirled around Caleb like a noose that never quite pulled tight. But this was different. He walked. Eventually, he found the broken little mission on the south end of town. Empty as an old grave. But Jack knew the shape of his friend's shadow. Knew where his boots would carry him when the world pressed too hard. He stepped through the hanging doors. The pews were empty. But a piece of wax still smoked on the floor near the altar, and the air smelled of sweat and something sharp, something wild. Jack stood in the center aisle. He didn't say anything. But he felt it. Like a bell still ringing somewhere just beyond hearing. Bill rode hard until the town shrank behind him like a bad tooth pulled. Dust spooled in the wake of his horse, the kind that got everywhere, your nose, your eyes, the soft hinges of your soul if you weren't careful. He didn't look back. Didn't need to. He already knew Caleb wasn't following. Not this time. Bill spat. The blood from his knuckles had dried, split again when he'd gripped the reins. The fight hadn't been meant to go that far. He just needed to jolt the boy, that's all. Rattle the madness out of him. Caleb had always been the dreamy sort, too soft in the underbelly, too many ideas. But he'd been useful. Loyal. Until now. Bill hated what the woman had done to him. Not just the blind one, the whole town, with its rotting saints and stories half-whispered in languages Bill never cared to learn. Esperanza, they called her. Hope. What kind of fool hopes in a place like that? He rode through the arroyo and crossed into low scrubland, the horse clattering over shale. His pack jostled behind him, loaded with just enough provisions to reach the border if he didn't get picky. The pistol was full. The rifle loaded. The gold, well, most of it, was tucked in the saddle lining. Bill wasn't a thinker. He prided himself on that. Thinking was what got men caught. What got them soft. What got them dead. But today, thoughts came uninvited. They rattled around like bones in a sack. Caleb's face, pale under the stars. The kid's eyes after Fort Smith. That girl with the red scarf in Arkansas, the way she screamed when. No. He shook his head, hard. That was the trick of the desert. It got in your mind. Made you see things that weren't there. He reached into his coat for the flask. Empty. Damn. The sun dipped behind the rise, dragging gold light across the land like a wound that refused to close. Bill pulled the horse to a stop. Dismounted. His boots crunched on loose rock. He stretched. Rolled his neck. Looked westward, where California waited like some mythic whore, all promises and soft lies. And then something caught his eye. A shape on the horizon. Barely more than a silhouette. But it moved against the wind. He reached for the rifle instinctively, training it toward the thing, but it was gone. Just sage and stone. Bill didn't spook easy. Not anymore. But when he turned back to the horse, it was staring at him with wide, white-rimmed eyes. Ears flat. Breathing hard. He felt it then, the shift. Like the world had inhaled, but forgot how to exhale. The way the earth tenses before lightning strikes. A whisper. He spun, rifle up, but again, nothing. Just that same goddamned wind, howling like a prayer without a tongue. Bill loaded into the saddle fast, kicking the horse forward. He didn't stop till moonrise. Even then, he didn't sleep. Just sat there, hand on the pistol, staring out into the dark. Because Bill, for all his boasting, for all his cold, had heard her voice too. And it was still with him. The first thing Rosa noticed was the silence. It wasn't the usual stillness of dawn before the bells rang or the hush of siesta when even the flies went drowsy. This was tight silence. The kind that wrapped around your ribs and squeezed. She stood at the back of the cantina, washing out the last of the glasses from the night before. Her wrists ached from the cold water. Her fingers smelled of limes and smoke and the skin oil of strangers. Behind her, the sun stretched a lazy gold hand across the tiled floor, warming the soles of her bare feet. She kept looking out the small window toward the hills. Something had changed. She'd seen him stumble out at dawn, that one, Caleb, they said his name was, though the women only whispered it now. Walked out like a man dying slow. eyes red as if he'd been crying for 1,000 years. Like he saw something behind the veil and didn't come back whole. Esperanza hadn't taken a visitor in nearly 3 years. Not since the last war. Not since the American girl with the bleeding mouth who ran screaming from the room, tore her dress on the cacti, swearing she saw the end of the world in the old woman's eyes. But this one, Caleb, he walked out quiet. And somehow that was worse. Rosa dried her hands and stepped into the courtyard. Light splintered off the clay walls. From the second story, someone was singing softly in Nahuatl. The tune twisted around Rosa's spine like incense smoke. She lit a cigarette and watched the street. Old men moved slower today. Children didn't play near the chapel wall. Someone, had stirred the old bones of the town. She thought of Esperanza. They called her Desadicil. One of the ungentled. The ones who burn instead of break. Rosa had only spoken to her once, when she was a child and got stung by a cluster of scorpions near the wash. Esperanza had whispered something and pressed her thumb to Rosa's brow. The pain vanished. The fever too. But Rosa didn't speak of that. Not even to herself. Instead, she listened. To the way the chickens scratched warily in the dust. To the bells that didn't ring. To the hush of the old adobe chapel that leaned toward the road like it knew something was coming. She looked west, toward the pass. A black dot drifted on the horizon. At first she thought it was a buzzard. Then a man. Then both. Her cigarette burned down to the filter. She didn't light another. Viene la muerte, said a voice behind her. It was old Lazaro, half drunk and wholly mad, the town's cracked prophet with his hat full of bird bones. He smiled with no teeth and nodded solemnly. Death comes? No, Nina, he said. La muerte ya está aquí. Death's already here. Rosa stared at the spot where Caleb had walked out, trembling and sun-bleached. She didn't fear the old stories anymore. She was one, in a way. Every woman in this town was. You lived long enough near the crossroads, and the earth remembered your name. The question wasn't if the prophecy would come true. The question was, what kind of world would rise from the ashes it left behind? They said Esperanza was born during a blood eclipse, when the moon glared red and the dogs howled all night long. They said her mother was a mute woman who came down from the mountains with no shoes and a belly swollen with secrets. They said her first cry came out in a language no one could translate, and that she did not weep like other infants but hummed, low and thrumming, like something buried far beneath the ground. Most of the town doesn't remember her childhood, or pretends not to. But the old women do. The abuelas in black lace who sit outside the church and weave rosary beads from hair and cactus silk, who nod knowingly when the wind changes direction. They remember the girl with red-black curls and white eyes, who stared too long at the sun and walked too close to the snakes. She was marked, they say, and some spit to break the spell. She was chosen, others whisper, and cross themselves. But the truth of her comes in pieces, never whole, like stories told through cracked mirrors. One version goes like this. She was 10 when she found the donkey tail plant growing behind the chapel. No one taught her what it was. No one told her its sap could blind you. She simply knew. She plucked it clean. Squeezed the white liquid into her palms. Then smeared it into her eyes without a sound. Her mother found her hours later, staring skyward, laughing softly to herself. She never saw again. Not the world as we know it. But she saw other things. After that, people came. Not locals, not always. Men from the war with blood on their hands. Women who'd miscarried 6 times in 6 years. Priests losing their faith. Murderers, poets, ranchers, madmen. They'd wait in the courtyard. Hands trembling. Looking for something no other door could give them. They said she told the truth too honestly. That her voice scraped out your insides like a paring knife. That she saw the shape of your soul and named it aloud. Not all who visited her walked out again. And still, they came. She never left the room beneath the house. That cool place behind the whorehouse walls. Anastasio had tried, once, to take her north, said she'd be safer in Albuquerque, in a convent, maybe with doctors. They found him the next morning in the arroyo. Face white as milk. Not a mark on him. It was Rosa who found the letter beneath Esperanza's pillow. 1 page. Written in Spanish, but the grammar was strange. Ancient, maybe. It said, "The eyes are not for looking. The eyes are for burning." Now, Esperanza breathes in shadows. Lives in prophecy. Her body is a room time has no claim over. Her hair still burns red, like a dying star. She hears the questions before they're spoken. She answers before you know what to ask. And when she speaks, the desert listens. Bill rode hard the first day out of Santa Fe. Didn't stop to water the mare. Didn't stop to piss. Just kept his head down and let the wind cut his face raw. The desert rolled out around him, endless and bitter, like a punishment he didn't understand but deserved anyway. He didn't look back once. Not at the city. Not at Paul lying in the dirt. He told himself it was self-preservation. Told himself that boy was always soft, always looking too long into things that ought to stay in the dark. That Paul asked for what he got. But he couldn't shake the sound of his voice. "We're going our separate ways." The words rang like a gunshot. By the second day, his shoulder ached something fierce. The winter chill was working its way deep into the joints. He'd meant to wrap it, meant to rest, but he'd been pushing too hard. Always pushing. Like he could outrun what he'd done. He stopped at a watering hole east of the Pecos and tried to catch some shut-eye. Dreamed of that blind whore, her face gone all wrong, eyes like open sores, but still whispering to him. "You are not made for the world that is coming." He woke up sweating. Shot twice into the dark just to silence the echo. By the third day, he was starting to think about the gold. Buried under a stack of rotted timbers just past the Devil's Backbone, where they'd left the quartermaster's wagon after the ambush. Paul never knew the full sum, Bill had kept that part to himself. Paul would have wanted to give it back, write it down in some ledger for men long dead. That's the kind of fool he was. Bill wasn't a fool. Bill was practical. Or he had been. Lately, things didn't seem to make as much sense. The desert looked wrong in the corners of his eyes, kept flickering like a film strip with missing frames. Trees where there weren't trees. Shadows that moved too fast, then didn't move at all. He started to talk aloud, just to fill the quiet. "Ain't nothing wrong with me. She was just a crazy old bat. This world don't run on ghosts. It runs on bullets and blood and grit. Paul's the one who always wanted meaning. Not me. I don't care." The horse whinnied beneath him. Rolled its eyes like it saw something Bill didn't. He told himself it was the wind. Always the wind. That night, he built a fire and wrapped himself tight, whispering every psalm he could half remember from his mother's voice, words that sounded like rocks in his mouth. Somewhere past midnight, something called to him. Not in words. Not in sound, but like a pressure behind the eyes. A prickling under the skin. He stood and turned, rifle raised. There was nothing there. Except a single pale flower blooming in the dirt, soft white petals glowing faintly in the moonlight, in the shape of a donkey's tail. Bill blinked once. Twice. Then spat. He ground it beneath his heel, heart hammering. But when he looked again, the flower was still there. Growing. And it was smiling. By the fourth day, Bill stopped counting. His hands had begun to shake, not from cold, not from hunger, but like some worm had crawled under the skin and set up camp behind the knuckles. He told himself it was just the old wound acting up. The one from Pea Ridge. The saber across the ribs. That kind of pain you could understand. But this? This was not the pain of something clean. He hadn't seen another soul for nearly 2 days, save for a buzzard that followed him like a damned creditor. Every few miles it'd flap up from a ridge and perch just far enough to be useless. Every time Bill turned his back, he swore he heard the thing whispering. "He's gone to Fort Smith. You hit him like a coward. Esperanza saw you. She sees everything." He rode until the sky blistered with clouds, dark as coal smoke and low as sorrow. When the storm came, it came hard. No warning. Just a ripping wind and stinging rain. He barely made shelter under the lip of an old outcropping, some godless wrinkle of stone that bent in on itself like a sneer. He didn't build a fire. Didn't dare. Instead, he sat in the wet and let the water soak through his coat and shirt and bones. And in the dark, the whisper came again. But this time, it wasn't the buzzard. It was Paul. "You said you'd never leave me behind. You said we were brothers. Why'd you do it, Bill?" Bill clenched his jaw so tight his teeth clicked. He cursed the air, cursed the rain, cursed her. That damn woman. That rotted saint. Esperanza with her milk-eyed stare and voice like a bell tolling underwater. He spat into the dirt and stood. "I ain't haunted," he said. "I ain't damned." And then, in the distance, something laughed. Not a cackle. Not a scream. It was worse, low, rich, and full of pleasure. Like the sound of a well-fed man leaning back in his chair to hear a story well told. Bill turned to face it, but there was nothing. Only rain. Only the edge of the desert and that same flickering flower, blooming again where it had no business blooming. A donkey's tail, slick with sap. He drew his knife and slashed it clean. Waited for it to die. It didn't. It bled, milk-white, just like before, but the wound sealed itself. Right there, in front of him. Like the stem had changed its mind. He stumbled back. Tripped on a stone and fell hard on his tailbone, swearing like the damned. When he looked up, the buzzard was sitting in the crook of a dead pinyon. It didn't blink. Just stared. And now, Lord help him, now it had Paul's eyes. He didn't sleep that night. Didn't ride either. Just sat under the rock and shook until his bones stopped obeying him. He started talking again. But this time it wasn't protest. It was confession. I let him do the strangling. I didn't stop it. I said it didn't matter. But it did. He cried. That last one. He cried and we didn't stop. I see them at night. All of them. Every boy we put in the dirt. I can't keep running. I know that now. But I'm scared. He whispered until the rain turned to snow and the whispering turned to silence. When morning came, the world was still. Bill stood. He left the gold behind. Didn't even look toward the ridge where it lay. Something in his spine told him it wasn't his anymore. Not truly. He mounted the mare, more gently than before, and turned east. Toward Fort Smith. Toward Paul. Toward whatever waited on the far side of memory and flame. They say she arrived. There was no midwife. No cradle. No crying. Just a morning after a blood-colored moon, when the cottonwoods bowed low and the mule deer fled without reason. The men of the village found her sitting at the edge of the well, not a babe, not quite a girl. Hair like river silt, skin too clean for someone with no name. No one asked where she came from. They remembered asking. But they couldn't recall the answers. She stayed with the widow Galan, the healer who had no tongue. The widow spoke through herbs and poultices, through smoke and salt and prayers stitched into thread. She gave the girl a name, Esperanza, hope. But the villagers never called her that. They called her La Muda, the silent one. They said she listened too closely. They said she knew when you lied. By the time she turned 12, 2 things had happened. 1, the well turned sweet, as if something down below had forgiven the world. 2, the flowers came, those same cursed, milky blooms that now follow the debt-keeper's trail. They rose in her footsteps, out of dry rock, through snow, in fields where only rust and ruin belonged. The old priest refused her communion. The dogs never barked at her, nor wagged their tails. They only watched. She never aged like the rest. By 16, she'd outlived the boys who once mocked her. By 20, she'd been blamed for a drought and 3 miscarriages. By 30, no one could agree on her face anymore. It wasn't until the soldiers came that they tried to burn her. The Union battalion, tired, low on morale, poisoned by bad whiskey and worse dreams, passed through the valley with more fear than sense. They heard the stories. Heard that Esperanza spoke with the dead. That she woke things when she prayed. That she knew where the gold was buried, where the blood ran thin. Captain Mulrooney ordered the pyre. The villagers said nothing. Some even helped. She didn't scream. Not once. They say the flames touched her shawl but would not climb. That her skin blistered, but did not blacken. That the gold rings on her fingers melted, and where they fell, the flowers grew. Captain Mulrooney shot himself that same night. They found his corpse twisted, as if something had laughed while breaking him. The battalion fled by dawn. The pyre still smoldered, untouched at its center. And Esperanza? She walked into the hills. Hannibal Wilkes had a habit of writing things down. Not just facts, though facts mattered, but things that felt true. Odd fragments. Bits of overheard prayers. Faces from his dreams. Smells he could not name. His journal was a mess of symbols and ink-slick madness, but it kept him tethered. And lately, it was filling faster than he liked. He sat alone in the back room of the inn, oil lamp throwing long, unkind shadows across the page. Outside, Fort Smith groaned under the weight of spring, wind tearing through branches like a warning. He flipped back through his notes. Man with the scarred cheek, tremor in left hand. Speaks of the blind woman as if she's God. Whispers in the barracks, some call her Esperanza. Others say that's not her real name. Bill still unaccounted for. Maybe circling back. Local girl missing. 3rd this month. He chewed his pen, staring at the last one. 3 gone. No ransom notes. No signs of struggle. Just gone. He reached under the floorboard and pulled out the cloth-wrapped bundle, newspaper clippings, yellow with time. He unfolded them carefully. There it was again. The pattern. Over decades, over states, through war and ruin, sudden disappearances near religious sites, abandoned whorehouses, ghost towns. Always the same motif. Woman seen in the days before, red hair, white eyes. He didn't believe in demons. Not the kind that wore horns and carried pitchforks. But he'd learned in the war that men could become something else when left too long with grief and silence. And this felt older than men. He flipped to a page near the back of his ledger, circled names. Caleb M. Jack L. Rosa D. Paul R. Missing. William H. Armed, dangerous. Esperanza. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He stiffened, reached for the revolver beneath the desk. Who is it? No answer. Then a slip of paper slid under the door. He waited. Counted to 30. Opened it. 3 words, written in trembling hand. She is waiting. His throat went dry. He opened the door. No one. Only the wind, and the faint scent of smoke and flowers. He closed the journal slowly. Blew out the lamp. If she was waiting, he'd need to get there first. Hannibal found the first sign of them in a churchyard. Not fresh, not even recent, but real. A knife mark on a cottonwood bench outside the chapel door, crude but familiar, and X scratched clean and shallow. A careless signal to someone else once. But Hannibal remembered it from Missouri, from a spring full of rain and lies. He stood with one hand on the bench and the other tucked in his coat, his face unreadable as ever. The preacher who'd let him sleep in the bell tower last night came hobbling out with a crust of bread and some boiled eggs. Looking for kin? The preacher asked. No, Hannibal said. He took the bread and didn't thank him. The old man didn't expect it. Something about Hannibal discouraged gratitude. He carried silence with him the way other men carried weapons. 2 days later, he found a discarded card, a 10 of hearts, pinned under a stone near the rail yard in Benton. Damp but deliberate. Something told him it hadn't blown there on its own. That was Jack's way. Always liked leaving trails, even when he was trying to disappear. Especially when he was trying to disappear. They were headed east. East meant Fort Smith. Meant Arkansas. Meant the ghost of the regiment, and something else besides. He remembered the woman's warning, not Esperanza, but the other one. The girl with the candle-colored hair, who'd looked at him without fear and called him by his real name. She'd said. They think they're running. But they're being pulled. Pulled toward something older than war. Older than any of them. He camped under stars that night, and in the hush of the prairie wind he thought he heard it again, a coyote's high, broken cry. But it wasn't a coyote. He'd heard that wail once before, in Santa Fe, when the woman with the blind eyes touched the skull of a dying man and showed him all the futures he'd never wanted. Now it came again, soft but sure, echoing in the dark like a whisper meant just for him. Keep going, it said. Keep going. So he did. Rosa had taken to sleeping with the lantern lit. Not for fear, exactly, though she wasn't above fear, but because of the dreams. With the light burning low, she could at least trick herself into waking. In the dark, they stayed longer. In the dark, they tried to talk. They were getting clearer, too. Sometimes she saw Bill, or what had been Bill, standing at the foot of her bed. His boots left scorched impressions on the floorboards, and when he smiled, it was like watching a wound open. Other times it was Esperanza, but younger. Hair like fire. Hands dipped in milk. And always, always the boy with the ruined mouth. She'd seen him only once in real life, a glance, really, when Bill and Paul rode in from Fort Smith, quiet and blood-wet. The boy hadn't lasted the night. But his tongue still tried to speak in her dreams. She busied herself during the days. She took in laundry. She sold poultices to women who didn't want to visit doctors. She rubbed oil into her own knees before walking to market, though the pain had stopped being physical years ago. When the whispers started again, when the children outside her window began playing La Dissatisile again, drawing chalk eyes on the bricks, she knew. Esperanza had woken something. Or someone else had woken Esperanza. She went out one evening at dusk, wrapped in a blue shawl, and left a small cup of salt water at the door. Her grandmother had taught her that. For the ones who can't cross running water, salt and stillness was the next best thing. She stayed in the doorway a long time. Watching. Waiting. A crow landed on the fence post across from her and tilted its head. It cawed once. Then twice. She whispered into the dusk. I remember you. And the wind shifted west. Bill had forgotten what day it was. Not in the usual way, the way of drunks and dying men, but in the deeper, marrow-lost way that happens when time starts folding in on itself. When the trail behind you goes soft and the road ahead feels like walking backward through a tunnel. He rode alone now, though his horse was long gone. Lost it outside of Aztec after a bad night and worse dreams. He didn't miss it. These days, his legs carried him farther anyway. The stars were too bright out here. He hated that. They burned like judgment. He'd taken to speaking out loud, just to keep the silence from settling in too deep. Weren't supposed to be like this, he muttered, not to anyone in particular. Wasn't never the plan. He didn't say what the plan had been. He didn't remember. Just knew it hadn't included Paul bleeding in the dirt, or those goddamn dreams that smelled like candle wax and roses and rot. He kept seeing her. Esperanza. Back when she was young, and later when she wasn't. Sometimes in between. Sometimes in pieces. Once he saw her standing in a cracked mirror at the base of an old well, and when he tried to smash the glass, the cracks crawled across his own face instead. The land was thinning. He could feel it in his teeth. In the ache behind his eyes. In the way trees sometimes leaned when he walked past, or how shadows didn't always match their owners. He passed through a hollow that buzzed with locusts and came out the other side bone-white and trembling. He didn't eat much now. Didn't need to. Something was sustaining him. Or feeding on him. Hard to tell the difference, these days. He camped that night near a dead creek bed and woke to find himself surrounded by animal bones. Clean-picked. Arranged like a message. He didn't read it. He couldn't. He just sat there, watching the sun come up like it had every intention of burning the whole sky down. He thought of Paul, and the look on his face. He thought of Rosa, of the way she used to carry firewood on one hip and fury on the other. He thought, and this part shook him worse than anything, he thought he heard his mother's voice, low and rough, calling his name like she used to when supper was ready. But there was no supper. There was no mother. There was no one left but Bill, and whatever was riding Bill now. He stood. He walked. And behind him, the bones rearranged themselves into a new shape. A crooked arrow, pointing home. The wind changed. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just a subtle shift, the kind that catches the corner of your coat, or lifts the edge of a tent flap when it shouldn't. The kind of change you feel before you understand it. Caleb woke before dawn, his mouth dry, the scar on his side twitching like a dowsing rod. The fire had gone cold, and Jack wasn't where he'd been. Panic rose like bile, but he smothered it fast. "Jack," he hissed into the dark. "You better not be playing." But there was no play left in either of them these days. They'd passed that point weeks ago, or had it been months? The desert didn't keep track for you. Then Jack came stumbling back out of the trees, breathless, face pale. "I saw him," he said, too loud, too fast. "I swear to God, I saw him." Caleb shot to his feet. "Saw who?" "The man. The one from the train. From the dreams." Caleb's stomach dropped. "Hannibal?" "No. Not him." Jack's mouth moved like he was trying to bite the right word before it bit him first. "The other one. The bad one. The one with the rope hands." Caleb felt it then too. Not a sound, not a shape, but a certainty. Like the taste of metal on the tongue, or the memory of an old wound reopening. Like a ghost with a scent. "Bill." "All right," Caleb said. "Pack your shit." Jack didn't move. "You believe me?" "I don't need to believe you," Caleb said, already throwing things into his bag. "I've been dreaming of him for weeks." "Same as you." "Why didn't you say?" "Because saying makes it real." "But it's real now. We're not just running anymore. We're being followed." Jack looked west, toward the canyon they'd planned to cut through. "Do you think he's behind us?" Caleb hesitated. "No." Jack turned. "Then where?" Caleb's eyes lifted toward the ridgeline, where the pines started thinning out like teeth. Ahead. And in the distance, something moved. Not fast. Not close. But steady. They both felt it. The weight of inevitability. The way the ground seemed to pulse underfoot. Like some enormous pendulum was swinging, and they'd only just stepped into its arc. They didn't speak again until the sun came up. Hannibal crouched by the riverbed, fingers grazing the place where the earth had been disturbed. Not recently, not fresh. But fresh enough. 2 sets of tracks. One lighter, springier, that'd be Jack, still too young to carry himself with care. The other more cautious, the steps heavier, purposeful. Caleb. He closed his eyes and listened to the land. Sometimes it talked. Not in words. But in shifts. In absences. In echoes that shouldn't be there. This was the part people didn't understand about tracking. It wasn't about prints. It wasn't about broken branches or horse dung or cigarette ash in the grass. It was about feeling what didn't fit anymore. It was about knowing when the world had flinched. He stood slowly, boots creaking, and turned his head to the west. The river snaked that way. So had the boys. So had something else. He didn't like how the trees felt. Too quiet. Even the crows had abandoned this stretch. He reached into his coat, fingers brushing the folded scrap of cloth he always kept there, the one from the prisoner back in New Mexico, the one who'd spoken in tongues for a full hour before choking on his own blood. He'd drawn a symbol in the dirt before he died, and Hannibal had memorized it. It was the same one Esperanza had carved into the underside of her table. The same one burned into Bill's shoulder. He didn't know what it meant, not exactly. But he knew where it pointed. And the ground was starting to warm, like something moving under it. A whisper came on the breeze then. He didn't flinch. Just stood there, hands still on the scrap of cloth, watching the trees ripple with something unseen. Almost there, he murmured. Almost there. It started with the wind. Not a scream, no, it was subtler than that. A rising hush, a breath drawn deep and held too long. Rosa heard it before she saw anything, before the lights flickered out across the valley, before the earth groaned low beneath her feet. She was standing in the doorway of the chapel, her hands dirty, her hair undone. Inside, the candles had all gone black. Hannibal was the first to appear, not walking, but striding with such certainty Rosa knew he'd followed something older than tracks to get here. Behind him, the boys emerged from the tree lean, wild-eyed and thinner than they'd been, but alive. They paused when they saw her. Caleb opened his mouth to speak, but Rosa shook her head. Not yet. Then came Bill. He didn't walk so much as stumble, coat torn, face bloodied, one hand wrapped in cloth that might have once been white. He looked worse than the others. He looked haunted. And when he saw Hannibal, he didn't run. He just knelt in the dust like a man too tired to pretend anymore. She called me, he said. She said come. No one asked who. Because they all heard her now, Esperanza, not speaking, not singing, just being. A presence. The red sky above the mountain began to pulse, a heartbeat made of light. The chapel doors blew open, and wind tore through the valley like 1,000 voices, each screaming some lost word. Inside, on the altar that hadn't been used in decades, she stood, alive but not. Her eyes rolled white, but her body glowed from within, veins lit up like rivers of fire. Hair spread around her like a halo soaked in blood. I remember, she whispered, and the earth shuddered. Bill stood, shaking. I came to confess. She smiled, sad and sharp. You came too late. Hannibal stepped forward, rifle in one hand, his other on the cloth in his pocket. This ends tonight. Esperanza looked at him. It's already ended. You're only now catching up. Caleb and Jack clung to the shadows, watching, the boys no longer just boys, but the only ones who'd ever walked out of her visions unclaimed. Rosa took a step forward. What do you want from us? Esperanza didn't answer. Instead, she split, not with gore, but with light. Her body opened like a book torn down the spine, and something else stepped forward. Not a woman. Not human. Something older than language. It reached toward Bill. He didn't resist. One touch, and he crumbled. Not dead. Unwritten. Gone from time. Then it turned to the rest. You may go, it said. But you will not forget. And just like that, the mountain exhaled, a breath that scoured the valley clean. When Rosa blinked, it was morning. The sky was blue. Birds sang like nothing had happened. The chapel was gone, only foundation stones left. No sign of Esperanza. No trace of Bill. Just the four of them, Rosa, Hannibal, Caleb, and Jack, standing in the dew-wet field, wondering if they'd dreamed it all. Is it over? Jack asked. No, Rosa said, eyes on the mountains. But it's done. Years later, people would come to the valley and say it felt strange, like the air had a memory. Some said a woman with red hair could be seen walking at dusk. Others heard whispers in the old language, calling out for the ungentled. But no one stayed long. And no one ever found the chapel.